You won't recognize yourself one day, not because you failed, but because time quietly changes the shape of who you are. I'm 74 years old now, and when I look back, the strangest feeling isn't regret, it's distance. Distance between who I was and who I thought I would become. When you're young, you believe you're building a life. You imagine each decision stacking neatly on top of the last, forming something solid and intentional. But life doesn't stack like that. It drifts, and unless you're paying attention, it drifts in directions you never consciously chose. If I could speak to you, the younger version of me, I wouldn't start with advice. Advice is easy to ignore. I would start with a warning. Not a dramatic one, just an honest one. I would tell you that the years you think are ordinary are the ones shaping you the most. Not the big moments, the quiet habits, the conversations you avoid, the people you assume will always be there. You think you'll always have time to say what matters, to fix what's strained, to return calls you postponed. I thought that too. I didn't understand that time doesn't take things away suddenly. It removes them gently, one delay at a time. And because nothing disappears all at once, you don't notice what you're losing until it's already gone. When I was younger, I thought strength meant independence, handling things alone, not needing anyone too much. But what I see now is that distance grows easily when you don't actively fight it. Relationships don't collapse from conflict nearly as often as they fade from neglect. I lost closeness, not because of arguments, but because of inattention. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell him this. The people you love are not background elements in your life. They are the substance of it. Work will fill whatever space you give it. So will ambition. So will distraction. But the moments that stay with you later are rarely the ones you planned. They're the small human ones you almost skipped. I would also tell him that emotional honesty is more dangerous than failure. Failure recovers. Emotional distance hardens. Every time you choose silence to keep the peace, you practice disconnection. And disconnection, once learned, doesn't stay in one place. It spreads. I spent years believing that showing less emotion made me stronger, that being composed meant being in control. What I didn't realize is that control can become a substitute for intimacy. You manage your feelings instead of sharing them. You become reliable but unreachable. If I could speak to my younger self, I'd tell him that loneliness doesn't arrive when you're alone. It arrives when you feel unseen, and you can feel unseen even in a crowded room, even in a full life, if you never let anyone see the real parts of you. There are things you'll tell yourself you'll deal with later. Conversations, apologies, gratitude. Don't wait. Later has a way of turning into never, and the cost of never is heavier than the cost of discomfort. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it with clarity. Because what hurts most is not the mistakes I made, but the connections I let weaken because I assumed there would always be more time. If you're listening to this now, you still have what I took for granted: attention, choice, presence. Don't spend them casually. They don't renew. That's what I would say. Silence is rarely empty. Most of the time it's full of things we didn't say. I didn't understand that when I was younger. I thought silence was neutral, safe, a way to avoid conflict, avoid discomfort, avoid saying the wrong thing. What I didn't realize is that silence keeps a record. It remembers every moment you chose convenience over honesty, and one day that record becomes impossible to ignore. I'm 74 now, and when I look back, I don't hear arguments echoing in my memory. I hear pauses, long ones, the words I rehearsed but never spoke, the feelings I felt but never shared, the moments I told myself, this isn't the right time. You don't notice the debt building at first. Emotional debt works quietly. Every time you choose not to explain yourself, not to apologize, not to express gratitude, you assume the moment will return, that you'll get another chance. Most of the time you don't. Life moves on. People change, and silence hardens into distance. I thought relationships ended because of big mistakes, affairs, betrayals, explosions. That happens sometimes, but far more often, relationships end because no one says what needs to be said while it still matters. They fade, they thin out, They become polite instead of close. And by the time you realize something is wrong, you don't know how to bridge the gap anymore. I lost people that way. Not all at once. Slowly. Through unanswered messages. Through postponed visits. Through choosing productivity over presence. I told myself I was busy. I told myself they understood. I never asked if they felt the same distance growing. One of the cruel tricks of life is that it lets you believe relationships are stable when they are actually fragile. They survive neglect for a while. They forgive inattention. But they do not forget it, and they do not wait forever. There were times I wanted to say I'm proud of you, or I'm sorry, or you matter to me more than I show. I didn't say those things because I assumed they were understood. They weren't. What is not spoken is not stored. It disappears. When you're young, you think emotional expression is optional, something you can add later when life calms down. But emotional truth doesn't wait for calm. It requires courage in the middle of chaos, and the longer you delay it, the harder it becomes to start. I see now that many of my relationships didn't suffer from a lack of love. They suffered from a lack of articulation. I felt deeply. I just didn't communicate deeply. And feelings that aren't shared don't strengthen bonds. They isolate you inside yourself. Loneliness doesn't always mean being alone. Sometimes it means being surrounded by people who only know a filtered version of you. You show up as capable, composed, and controlled, while the parts of you that need connection stay hidden. Over time, that separation becomes exhausting. If I could speak to my younger self again, I would tell him this. Say the thing, even if your voice shakes, even if you don't have the perfect words, even if it makes things awkward for a moment. Awkwardness passes, distance doesn't. You will never regret expressing care. You will never regret honesty offered in good faith. But you will regret the moments you stayed silent to protect your image or your comfort. Some people will leave your life no matter what you do. That's unavoidable. But others leave because you didn't meet them where they were while you still could. That's the kind of loss that lingers. Time doesn't just take opportunities, it takes people. And once a person becomes a memory, all the words you saved become useless. Say what matters while it can still land. Love doesn't usually disappear. It changes shape. When I was younger, I thought love was something you either had or lost. I believed it survived as long as there were no major mistakes, no betrayals, no dramatic endings. What I didn't understand is that love can exist and still feel distant. It can remain present while becoming thin, fragile, almost symbolic. I'm 74 now, and I've learned that love requires maintenance, not just intention. People don't drift apart because they stop caring. They drift apart because care is never translated into action. You assume love will hold things together on its own. It doesn't. It needs attention. It needs effort. It needs you to show up even when it's inconvenient. I loved people deeply. That's not something I question anymore. What I question is how often I assumed love was understood instead of demonstrated. I believed that providing stability was enough, that consistency replaced closeness, that being there physically mattered more than being present emotionally. It took me years to understand that emotional presence is not automatic. It's a choice you make again and again, and every time you choose distraction over engagement, you create distance that doesn't announce itself. The loneliness that arrives later in life is rarely about being alone. It's about realizing how many connections became shallow without you noticing. You're surrounded by people, memories, routines, and yet something feels missing. Not because love was absent, but because it was diluted. I watched relationships turn into roles. Partner, parent, parent, friend. Titles replaced intimacy. Conversations became functional, necessary, efficient. We talked about schedules, responsibilities, logistics, rarely about fears, longings, doubts. And because everything appeared stable, I didn't question what was being lost underneath. Attachment is easy when life is simple. It becomes harder when life becomes demanding. And instead of fighting for closeness, many of us choose efficiency. We become good managers of our relationships instead of active participants in them. There were times I felt lonely while sitting next to someone I loved. That's a difficult loneliness to admit, because it doesn't fit the story of success or stability. You're not supposed to feel that way if you've done everything right. So you stay quiet. You normalize it. You assume everyone feels the same. Maybe they do. That doesn't make it harmless. What I see now is that love fades not from lack of feeling, but from lack of vulnerability. We protect ourselves as life goes on. We share less. We reveal less. We stop risking emotional exposure because it feels unnecessary or unsafe. And slowly we become harder to reach. If I could speak to my younger self again, I would tell him this. Closeness requires courage, long after passion fades. It requires choosing honesty over harmony, depth over ease, presence over productivity, and none of those choices feel urgent until it's too late. There are people I wish I had leaned toward instead of assuming they would always be there. People I thought I had time with. People I loved quietly, from a distance, believing that love alone was enough to keep us connected. It wasn't. Love is not just something you feel, it's something you practice. And when you stop practicing it, it doesn't vanish. It waits. Sometimes it waits long enough to turn into longing. The quiet loneliness that arrives later in life isn't punishment. It's information. It's showing you where you stopped engaging fully, where you chose safety over openness, where you settled for connection that required less from you. If you still have people in your life who matter, don't assume that's permanent. Permanence is built, not granted. Say more, ask more, listen longer, be willing to feel uncomfortable for the sake of closeness. Love doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for presence. Legacy is a word people use when they want life to feel larger than it is. When I was younger, I thought legacy was about achievement, about leaving something behind that proved I had been here. Success, recognition, a name people remembered. Now at 74, I understand how small that definition was. What actually remains of a life is not what you built, it's what you left inside people. Careers end, titles fade, possessions scatter, even accomplishments lose their sharpness with time. But the way you made people feel has a strange durability. It lingers in memory, long after details disappear, long after facts blur, long after your voice is gone. When I look back now, the moments that matter most aren't the milestones I once chased. They're the quiet interactions I didn't notice at the time. A conversation that changed someone's confidence. A moment of patience that made someone feel safe. A time I chose kindness when it wasn't required. Those moments didn't feel important then. They feel essential now. I used to think memory worked like a record, that life would be remembered as it happened. It doesn't. Memory edits ruthlessly. It keeps emotions and discards events. It remembers tone more than content, presence more than performance. That's when it hit me. Most of what I spent my life worrying about will never be remembered. But the emotional residue I left behind will be. There are people who remember me more kindly than I deserve, and others who remember distance where I thought there was care. That's a difficult realization, because intention doesn't survive time. Impact does. You don't get to decide how you're remembered. Your behavior decides for you. I regret the moments when I was too distracted to listen fully, too busy to notice someone needed reassurance, too focused on my own worries to offer generosity without being asked. Not because those moments define me, but because they were opportunities to be more present than I allowed myself to be. Legacy is built in ordinary moments, in how you respond when no one is watching, in whether people feel lighter or heavier after interacting with you, in whether you created space for honesty or required people to perform around you. Most people think they'll worry about legacy later in life. The truth is you're shaping it every day. Every interaction leaves a trace. Every choice trains people on how to experience you. I didn't understand that until I noticed how people spoke to me differently as I aged. More carefully, more gently, some with warmth, some with distance. And I realized they weren't reacting to my past achievements. They were reacting to patterns, to the person I had consistently been. There's a particular clarity that comes with age. You stop asking how to be impressive and start asking how to be remembered. Not in stories, but in feeling. Did people feel respected? Did they feel seen? Did they feel safe being honest around you? If I could speak to my younger self again, I would tell him this. Your life will be remembered in fragments, Make those fragments kind. Make them human. Make them honest. You don't need a grand legacy. You need a coherent one. One where your values showed up consistently, not just when it was convenient. What survives you is not the life you imagined, but the one you practiced daily. And the older you get, the clearer it becomes that this was always the point. There comes a moment when you stop asking what else you can become and start asking what you've already been, not out of defeat, but out of honesty. I'm 74 now, and at this age clarity replaces urgency. You're no longer chasing time, you're standing inside it. You begin to understand that life was never asking you to be extraordinary. It was asking you to be awake, awake to how quickly days turn into years, awake to how easily you postpone what matters, awake to the quiet ways you drift when no one interrupts you. The tragedy isn't that life is short. The tragedy is that so much of it is lived unconsciously. I used to think meaning would arrive someday, fully formed, like an answer waiting at the end of effort. It doesn't. Meaning is assembled slowly, from attention, from choice, from presence, and most of all, from the willingness to stop pretending you have unlimited time. At some point, the future stops feeling infinite and starts feeling finite. That doesn't make life smaller, it makes it sharper. Every moment gains weight. Every decision gains clarity. You stop asking, will this work out? And start asking, is this worth my time? That question changes everything. If I could leave you with one truth, it's this. Your life is not shaped by dramatic turning points. It's shaped by what you repeatedly return to, what you tolerate, what you ignore, what you choose not to question. Time doesn't punish you for mistakes. It responds to patterns, and patterns once established quietly decide the shape of your days. You don't need to fix your entire life. You don't need a new identity or a grand reinvention. You need awareness, the kind that notices when you're avoiding something important, the kind that recognizes when comfort has replaced honesty, the kind that reminds you that attention is your most valuable currency. I can't give you more time. No one can. But I can tell you this with certainty. The time you still have will feel very different depending on how consciously you live it. If you keep postponing, it will pass quickly. If you engage fully, it will deepen. One day you'll look back just like I am now, and the question won't be whether you succeeded or failed. It will be whether you were present for your own life, whether you recognized yourself in the choices you made, whether the person you became felt like a betrayal or an expression of who you truly were. That's the question that waits at the end. And the answer is being written right now, in the way you choose to live the next ordinary day. Don't wait for clarity to act. Act and let clarity follow. That's what I learned.